And hello and welcome back to the Financial Advocacy Podcast. I am your host, David Kinder, registered financial consultant, chartered life underwriter, with my co-host, Mike Moffett. And we're here today to basically interview, spotlight one of our financial advocates. This is someone that we've both done some work with. So we have a little bit more insight into how this gentleman works as opposed to maybe others that might meet him for the first time and such. We kind of want to spotlight him. Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. What do you think of this guy?
Yeah, I mean, Brian's a great guy. I think that with his background and experience, I've worked with him several different times. He seems to have an ability to make things that seem overwhelming and complex kind of simple and attainable for everybody to understand. And he tries to make it, put it into layman's terms and make it so that it's easier than it would normally be. Maybe if, you were studying it yourself or somebody else is explaining it to you. So I like Brian a lot. I think he's a great guy. And, I've always had good experiences working with him. And, I couldn't recommend him more highly.
I completely agree, and it's one of the things. And you notice that in our title here, we have accountant and advisor Brian Sommerfield. I'll bring him on in a second. But what's interesting is that the tax code can seem overwhelming when you're doing your taxes. Financial advice can be overwhelming, especially because it's so easy for us to get into the weeds. How many episodes have we done? This is what, number 18? I mean, how many of the times have we gone into the weeds just ourselves? Hopefully, we make it comprehensive and understandable, but it's so easy to do. Brian does keep it high level, yet detailed enough. Let's bring him in. Brian, welcome to the podcast. Thrilled to have you here to kind of spotlight you and kind of expose you a little bit to social media because you're nowhere.
I am void of social media.
And I know that's on purpose. And
it is very much on purpose.
Yeah, and I don't blame you at all, partly because, look, half of what I do is all on social media, and believe me, it's a blessing and a headache all at the same time. Glad to have it. But what the neat thing is that we met you through a mutual financial group that we're all part of, and what we get to do is we get to introduce clients who want to learn more about tax-focused financial strategies with you. But let's talk more about you. I know a little bit about you. Actually, I know quite a bit about you.
You know quite a bit about me.
Yeah, you're not exactly a stranger here.
No.
But you actually went. Yeah, but we have to translate that for everybody else. So we got to, spoon feed you to everybody else that's watching and listening. So you went to Cal State San Bernardino, which is, for me, right down the road here, and current news, that's where all the fires are.
Yep.
These days. And you majored in accounting.
Mm-hmm.
So your intentions on you wanted to be an accountant, yet here you are in financial services too. What was your early career like?
I think once you're an accountant, you're always an accountant. And out of college, I went to a well-recognized business school with a concentration in public accounting. So that's what my degree is in. That's what I wanted to focus on. I went to school for it. I graduated for it. I never changed my major. I literally, when I went to college, that is what I wanted to do. So I was focused like a laser beam. And then out of school, I went to work for one of the larger international CPA firms. Decided I did not like auditing, and that's a big focus in that. I loved individual tax work. When I worked for a regional firm, I really liked it. Had an opportunity to move back home to northern Michigan, and that's where I raised my family, purchased a small accounting practice, and I still have that accounting practice today that I purchased in. I started working for it in 92. I bought it in 95, and I still have it today.
Oh, wow. Okay. But home is originally in Michigan, not here in Southern California.
Correct. Yep.
That I didn't fully realize. I thought you were kind of born and raised here, and then you moved out of town.
Nope,
like most people are doing these days.
The military brought me out to the Mojave Desert, and I went to college while I was in the military, and I wanted to go to UCLA, and my advisor says, you can go to UCLA, but this little school down the road here is a better school for what you want to do. So I would recommend you go there. I took his advice and then decided I didn't want to raise a family in Southern California when gang-related activity was starting to hit the Inland Empire. And
I think it was probably originated here, but okay, go ahead.
but it was starting to really get bad in the Inland Empire at that time. And so it was time to move back to someplace I knew. And once the kids got out of school, I missed the warmth and activity level that I enjoyed in Southern California. So Southwest Florida gives that to me. I'm licensed in, I think, 25 states now. So the world is so much smaller now because of the internet, Zoom meetings, being able to just, hey, when are you going to be in this state next? You have time right now. Let's just hop on a Zoom call. And with the technology that we have, and if you use it to its fullest, it literally feels like you're sitting across the table from somebody. And if you can get that, then it really doesn't matter where it's at. And what I'm finding is that millennials like technology more than anybody because they can send you information, they can sign documents on their phone, they can view documents on their phone. As long as you have a secure portal that you can put stuff into, they can just log into it just like they would for their bank documents, and they can handle everything right there. If they have any questions, just hop on a FaceTime call, a Zoom call, a regular call, and it's all taken care of in real time. They never had to leave where they were at. They never had to schedule a real appointment and spend time driving, from place to place. It's just spontaneous and done while it's top of mind.
Yeah. The greatest benefit out of this whole pandemic of everything, it has been the proliferation of Zoom. Now, granted, if you invested in Zoom, I think it tanked 90% from its high. So you don't want to be invested in Zoom, but you want to be a client of Zoom, using it to save time, effort, cost. I am now so much more attuned to how much time I spend on the road whenever I'm going anywhere. And I'm like, it took me an hour and a half just to go 10 miles in rush hour traffic. If I didn't have to go anywhere, life would be so much easier. And
you're not one of those
Zoom.
You're not one of those that just ride on your motorcycle and go down 215 down the center lanes, 55 miles an hour while everybody else is stopped. You're not one of those guys?
Oh, no, I am not. You're the motorcycle guy out of the three of us.
I did. I learned how to drive a motorcycle when I lived in Southern California. That is true.
And I'm not, okay. We're in the risk management business. That's a risk I'm not taking on. I'm just saying. I wouldn't let my ex-wife do it either.
My motorcycle last year because my wife wanted me to, and she said, "I trust your driving." The problem is down here in Southwest Florida, you have little old ladies whose head are not above the steering wheel; they're below the steering wheel, and that's a problem. And for my age bracket, the mortality rate for people in my age bracket, the worst is motorcycle riders.
I could see that. And of course, out here, at least I'm sure in California, and I'm sure it's other places too, but once you get a little bit of rain, all the oil slick starts to come up. That becomes more of a hazard there too. So my uncle rides, I think how old is he now? I'm going to say he's 65, 66. He still rides as far as I can tell. Good for him. He's safe. Mm-hmm. I think he's had one accident over like 40 years of riding. So, no, and he always says it's not if you get into an accident, it's when.
When. Yeah.
So, I'm all for that. Although my son, he's going to turn 19 here in a couple of months. He's planning on getting a motorcycle. I told him the same thing. So, we'll see what he decides to do. He's bigger than me. So he might just get his way no matter what. One of the things I wanted to bring up a little bit is that, Brian, you're not a CPA, but you certainly are an accountant. What's the difference? Does the public really need to know the difference? What I don't think that there's a big difference.
The only thing a CPA can do that I can't do is sign off on an audited set of financial statements, which I'm not auditing, or represent somebody in tax court in front of the IRS. And if you got to that point, you would definitely want to have a tax attorney that's what they specialize do it, as opposed to somebody that prepared your tax returns.
Yeah. So basically, yeah. So basically, there's no difference for someone who's looking for tax advice for their tax returns and tax filing and such. There's going to be no difference there.
Yeah,
Now,
right. And for me,
from
I don't do any auditing, and I haven't done any auditing since I left Southern California. My focus has been on taxes, and then because of that, a lot of consulting, a lot of business consulting, and then I quit doing accounting and payroll years ago because there's not a lot of money in it for the amount of time and what it does to keep you bogged down. And then in 2001, around there, when I started adding financial services, that was supposed to take care of the other. And what taxes do is that, whether you want to realize it or believe it or not, almost everything in our world financially revolves around the tax code. And that's why I firmly believe every financial decision you make, it should involve the tax code. If it doesn't, you're probably hurting yourself on both making the right financial decision or at least have all the numbers, because the after-tax numbers mean more than anything else.
Yes, and to kind of build on it, there's the phrase that eventually maybe I'll trademark it somehow. I don't know if you can trademark this. See, in accounting, there's generally accepted accounting principles,
Yeah.
GAAP.
Mm-hmm.
I want there to be something called generally accepted financial planning principles, GAAP. I don't know how you can't say it the same way, but
Yeah,
it's the merging of the two.
Mm-hmm.
It's the merging of the two, bringing the accounting and generally accepted financial planning all together to help us understand the decisions that we're making.
Your problem will be on that. And I think that's probably a good lead in to where you would like to go here, is that, when you look at generally accepted accounting principles, those are established principles that establish how people keep track of all their accounting records, how everything takes place and happens. There's a reason for it and in place. Your signed off financial statements and audited statements all reflect those principles. That's the playbook. That's the game plan. Those are the rules that everybody plays by. It's almost like a science in a way, a mathematical science. When you start getting into the financial end, that's a whole different world, because there are so many different opinions and there's so many different phrases out there. And I've always had what's been called water cooler conversation. If you're around a water cooler and somebody is going, hey, I get away with this on my taxes, or I do this. I'm like, you know what? Give me a call. I want to address that so you can be the smartest person around your water cooler, because let's face it, when guys were younger, they might, brag about their athletic conquest or other conquests that might have happened.
Yes, locker room talk.
None of that's believable anymore. So now they go to things like taxes. Oh yeah, I write off this, or no, you don't have to report that, or just in financials the same way. How many times do you hear phrases that because we have run numbers and proven them incorrect, that people just throw out there as fact? And how many of those would you have to boil down to get to what would be generally accepted financial principles? It'd be good if it would be, but even how many times do I have somebody that calls me and says, hey, my friend told me I'm paying too much in taxes. Can I put money in an IRA? Will that lower my taxes? And here's the best answer I can give you on every single tax question or accounting question. It depends.
It depends.
It depends. It's kind of like, I was joking with my wife the other day. I said, it's real easy to get a job at Chick-fil-A. You only need to know two things. It's my pleasure. Well, of course. Hey, can I get some more sauce? Well, of course. Hey, thanks for that. It's my pleasure. Well, in the accounting world, it depends. And here's the reason why it depends. Most accountants live in 1 year increments, a year behind. They look at things through a 1 year tax liability. Will it lower your current tax year liability if you put money into an IRA? It will not lower it. It will delay it. But do you want me to look after your 1-year tax liability, or do you want me to look at your lifetime tax obligation? And how much more taxes will you pay on every dollar you put in that IRA compared to what you would save in the long run if you just paid the taxes now and then put that dollar somewhere where you'd never have to pay taxes on it again legally? That's a whole different conversation than what 99.9 repeating tax accountants would ever tell a client. It's like, oh yeah, we'll lower your taxes. How much do you want to put in? Have your guy give me a call when it hits, so that we can put your tax return through. Whole different conversation. And sometimes the questions that we ask or the information that we want to get deeper into is a whole lot more important than just answering a question. And I think for me, I never want a transaction-based business. I want a relationship-based business. And yesterday, I had a call from somebody, or I'm sorry, it was a text from a longtime tax client and financial client. And he was like, hey, I've got somebody that told me that they should just put money in their 401k because they're probably never going to pay any taxes on it in the future anyways. And I'm like, okay, you got way too much floating matter here on this question. I gave him a quick call. I said, I'm going to give you a quick call. And he said, we got into it a little bit deeper. And so he goes, okay, now I understand, why we're doing what we're doing and why what this person's talking about. The only way for them to succeed in what they want to do is to totally fail. And because he understands both the tax side now and the financial side, he can put them both together and go, okay, now that makes sense. It'd be easy just to give somebody an answer, but an answer without the context and all the background information is the difference between just answering a question, moving on, or make it relationship, give them all the information, and now you have an advocate.
So key the things you're talking about, because one of the things I do is I delineate from tax filing advice and tax planning advice. And so I'll go into tax planning all day.
Isn't it all the same?
Oh God, no. My disclosures have to state that they're completely different, because I am not a registered tax preparer of any kind. Okay. Maybe one day, but then I'm being warned, don't do it. It's a trap. Better not. Let someone else do all that. And I can appreciate the warnings. But tax filing is looking at the tax return itself and figure out, did you claim all of your deductions, giving all the advice based on the past year? I'm not into that. Maybe one day.
Here's the reality right now in the industry. Younger people are realizing that the amount of hours that are required in this industry are insane. And they are not pursuing it. The accounting world, they're losing more and more people every day, and there's not enough to replace it on the backside. And someone asked me a long time ago, well, aren't you worried about, TurboTax and all those? Not. And this is the reason why. If the tax code was just black and white and everything were yes or no answers, you could go in and you could literally write the code for the program in the question and answer. If you answer yes to this, then here's where you go next. And it would all just be like a really basic DOS program with yes and no answers. Right. Where accountants really make their money is in the gray area. And the tax code was really written for two people. Mike Moffat, what were those two people?
Those who understand it and those who don't.
And what about the people that understand it? They're going to pay less in taxes. And it's funny when I have people that call me up and go, hey, I got your name from so-and-so, and I was doing my taxes on TurboTax, and they're going to ask a question. I'm like, well, ask the box. just ask the box, and what kind of response are you going to get? It's not that easy.
I know you and I had this conversation one time because we were talking about this, and you were telling me how simple it would be for the government to simplify this thing if they really wanted to, and just make a flat tax on your income, and that's it.
It'd be easier if they just made a consumption tax,
right?
And just made a flat flat tax on consumption, and that's it.
Well,
And
I
I would
remember
say make it
the Herman
999
Cain
and 9.
campaign.
Yeah.
999. Yes.
Mm.
I mean, the guy was
Yeah.
selling pizzas at the time, so
He
I forgot
was
the name
he
of the
was
brand,
good.
but so there's that. But of course, there's so many different lobbyists at play in our government, influencing the tax code, and so influencing the lobbyists and the Congress people that are looking at passing different laws. When, of course, we're kind of getting on a
1913.
sidetrack here, but
No, 1913. You're exactly right.
yeah, ever since then, and well, that brought up something else
1913,
in
the
my mind. But
16th Amendment, the election or the selection of the tax code. The 17th Amendment, the direct selection of senators as opposed to being directly appointed by the states and the Federal Reserve, all happened in 1913. And what happened is we became a country that was based in the states and state-led, to where there was a more concentration of power and money in Washington, D.C., and that's when things really started changing. And that's where the lobbyists and the feeding frenzy and all of that, with all of our tax dollars, now have to go to Washington before we get them back to spend them the way that we would want to.
And the decoupling from the gold standard that happened under Nixon. We got more power in the Federal Reserve. That's I mean, we're talking about how our national debt really came about, because then Reagan passed his tax code of 1986, and ever since then, now under Reagan, the national debt tripled under him, on 2.7 times, I should say, almost triple. And then ever since then, every 10 years, the national debt has doubled until the past few years. Now it's gone higher quicker. I understand now we're at $35 trillion of national debt. And this year being a presidential election year, there's more things that are on the roster that are up for questioning, depending on who's going to win the presidency. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but Senator Ron Wyden out of Oregon, he's got his paper called Treat Wealth Like Wages, and talking about anti-deferral accounting. So we're talking about, as instead of getting a step up in basis and stuff at death, that's going to go away. They want to do with anti-deferral accounting, every time you have a gain, even though you didn't sell, you're still going to pay taxes on it each year.
And all that stuff is against GAAP in every way, shape, and form. So they're not only trying to change the tax code, they're trying to change a whole lot of other stuff. Now, here's my question to you, and this is where the hunted becomes the hunter. I'm looking at your beautiful little white tags underneath your names, the tax exempt wealth guy and the tax exempt tax deductions. Wouldn't it be great if you could take your biggest asset that you currently have, or most of your assets, or any type of thing that you want to get off the radar screen of the IRS in regard to the tax code, and put it there? Wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to worry about who was president, who was the Fed chair, who dealt with any of that stuff? Wouldn't it be great if you could just live your life and not have to worry about the tax code, because you have accumulated your wealth in areas in which you can be tax exempt?
It's such a wonderful premise that most people have no idea exists. And at least based on past precedent, anytime that there's been a change in the tax code regarding the ways that we like to advise our clients, everything has been grandfathered according to the effective date of the contracts, which shows one of the advantages of having contract-based financial plans as opposed to account-based. When you have a 401k account, you have an IRA. A is account.
And where does the term 401k come from? Where does the term 403b come from?
Yeah, exactly. They all come from the tax code and all of the different publications out there, which is interesting. And we're going to say right out, there is no publication for life insurance. It's so interesting. It's almost like it's the greatest secret that no one wants anybody to learn about. I mean, I've got, and you've seen my website, I've got all the different publications and, these common for financial planning. And there's not a single one dedicated for life insurance. Not a single one. Granted, it has so many different uses and applications and different situations, for pension plans and stuff like that. There's so many different things. But at the same time, you'd think that the government would actually put together one guide for it, and yet they haven't. And maybe they just don't want to be hung down to it, because
it is on purpose. And again, you can go back to 1972, what they saw with the changes from having, defined benefit plans compared to defined contribution plans, and that whole change, and why they created the IRA and all of that. I mean, historically, we don't have to dig very deep to find answers to all these questions. They're just well beyond the scope of today's podcast. That might have to be part 2 or 3.
We might go there.
I mean, the interesting thing is that most people used to retire with a pension, right? So you would have kind of like this guaranteed income for the rest of your life. And then a lot of these companies figured out, it seems, that they could switch and go away from this pension and make everybody self-fund their own retirement, saving these companies, I don't know, millions, billions, maybe trillions.
Yeah, they didn't want to manage it anymore. That was a huge liability on their financial statement.
Right. So they basically moved the responsibility from themselves as the employer to you as the employee, and you have to now manage all of that and assume all of the risk as well, both with investments and tax.
Well, there is one advantage, and one advantage is that with pension plans, which are defined benefit plans, you have to stay with that company or organization for however X number of years, usually a minimum of 20, especially for, public service. Got to be with the police department or fire department, whatever, for 20 years, then you can retire. Whereas with the defined contribution plan, yes, you take on the risk, but at least you can move that plan. You don't have to give it up and such. There's vesting privilege. There's other things with that. So I could see that. The problem is you're almost guaranteed to not have accumulated enough if you're a career changer often enough and you're not contributing as well as we can.
And that's true. And that's part of it. A lot of people don't roll their 401k to their current employer. They leave it where they were. Right?
Yeah,
so
and of course, but do they contribute new again at the new place? So there's a lot of factors there.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of things that go into it.
So Alonzo's asking, he thought that like the anti-deferral accounting we were talking about earlier was for only 100 million plus. Here's my concern, Alonzo, is that once they start with something at a higher tax rate, it has a trickle-down effect over time. Something's going to happen. And I'm hearing things, and I hate saying I hear it, I can't substantiate it, but you never know. Don't look at a bunch of TikTok CFPs here. Well, that's their problem. Tamara, Tefra, Defra, Mech. Yes. Remember, before the tax code of either 86 or 88, whenever they changed all that stuff, that's when they created modified endowment contracts. But before that, we actually had endowment contracts. So that was when you could actually have you pay to 65 and then the contract cashes out. You've met the goal and then you get to cash out the contract at that point. So yeah, with Tamara, Tefra, and Defra, I don't even ask what they stand for. I just know all three of those became a problem. And any contracts that are dated like before 88 or 86 or whatever, I always have to double check, make sure that you don't mess with them because they have preferred tax status compared to newer contracts. So always double check. Rael, salute to you and glad to see you guys on here and participating. So here's the thing, Brian, you were also a radio host. Let's shift gears a little bit. Radio host and political advocacy, political involvement. Let's talk a little bit about, by the way, as a radio host, how are we doing?
You're doing fine.
Okay.
Here's the key to whether you're doing radio, podcasts, whatever you're doing. If you can sit down and have a conversation, whether you're doing it solo or with a group of people or with guests, and it's on a level that just feels like you're sitting around a kitchen table having a conversation and you're part of that conversation, it's probably pretty good. There's actually a genre called rock talk. And if you can take somebody that listens like classic rock, duct tape them to a chair and just have them listen and not feel like they're squirming, you're probably doing a good job of just having conversation that anybody could listen to and enjoy. And oh, by the way, might learn something along the way. So As soon as you started talking about Defra and Tefra, the guys in the duct tape chairs really started getting uncomfortable. You keep everything else on a more of a lighter level, you're probably going to do okay.
Or
some things just go beyond the limit. So I was renting at a place. I just moved back to Michigan when I moved back from Southern California. And one of the guys that was renting from one of the landlords, they said something to the effect of, oh, we've got football season starting in a couple of days, and I still don't have anybody that can, do color commentary with me. And the person said, well, I know somebody that, when they're watching games, they literally say something before the, announcers ever do. They got my name. That night I was at the radio station, and they said, okay, let's just pretend there's a game going on in front of us. And they took the tape, about 5-10 minutes of audio, took the tape to the owner of the station, said, hey, let's give this guy a chance and let him go out and do some games. So I went out the next day, did my first high school football game, had never been on the radio, flipped the switch, had no training, and did about 20 years of high school sports, football, basketball. Wow. I've done some baseball games. I could do any sport that I know anything about. I could call it on the radio. And radio is just a great medium. I've loved radio since I was really young, and would listen to AM radio for hours. And during baseball season in the summer, when stations would go forever, I could listen to 5 or 6 different baseball games a night, just flipping around the dial after the Tiger game was over. And so I've always had a love for radio. And when I was with a company, when I had my securities license, I said, is it worth, doing radio ads or something like that? He says, people don't get a lot of benefit from just doing radio ads, but if you could get on the station and actually talk with somebody, that's where you get the most benefit. And I said, well, that's easy. So I contacted the guy that did the morning show and said, hey, if you ever want to have me on to talk about anything I do, you can ask me questions as far as, tax, business consulting, insurances, investing, whatever you want to ask, I'll be more than happy to talk to you. He goes, that'd be great. I've got a slot open on Tuesday morning at 7:30. I showed up Tuesday morning at 7:30, did my first 30 minutes. We run out of time. After about
That's a good slot. You're getting people on the way to rush hour traffic on the way to work.
And he said, how about you just come in for a whole hour? Why don't you do from 7 to 8? So then I was doing 7 to 8. And what we realized is it was a political-based talk show. And after about 3 or 4 weeks, we realized that everything that I talked about would have and has a political bend to it. Just think about everything that you can talk about right now in politics. And again, I don't care whether you're right wing, left wing, center wing, wing nut, Red Wings fan, I don't care what you are. You bring up a political topic and you will probably be able to figure out why. If you know where the money's coming from, you'll know why. I'll give you an example. I'm in Florida right now. There is a measure on the ballot that has to do with legalizing marijuana. I could tell you that if you want to know why it's on the ballot, is because there are people that have a financial interest in legalizing marijuana to control that market. And if you look back to see who contribute to it, work your way up the chain, you'll know exactly the reasons why. Same thing happened in Michigan. So if we look at all of this, all this political stuff has a business, tax, insurance. I mean, look at insurance. How much of that deals with tax code? How much, everything we do, you can relate it to the tax code. So what happened was, after doing that for a few months, then I was, hey, I've got to go on vacation. Do you mind filling in and doing 3 hours of radio? And then other programs, I would be filling in and doing those. Since I still had the sports background, I would get phone calls to say, hey, can you hop on and do a weekend shift of doing just sports stuff? That's the easiest money you can make. That's easy money. Easy. And so at the time when I had an opportunity to put together a business plan for somebody to put together a radio station package. And I did a really good job of putting together the plan. And they said, you know what? Why don't you just become a part of us and be part of this radio group? And so that led to me then having my own radio show. And I did that for a number of years. And that was fun, but it ties you down for 3 hours every day from Monday through Friday, from 9 to noon. And I like to travel. I like to do things. I like to, I get more business done outside the office than I ever do inside the office. But at the time, I did a radio show. I had my tax practice. I had my financial services practice. I had a couple of restaurants. I basically lived off a schedule. And to get out of that and just to do what I love to do the most, and what I discovered as consulting other people is that the more specialized you get, the least you'll work and the more money you make. And I wanted to become very niche and become one of the best at what I do. And that is where I decided to put my energy and focus. And so, like an athlete or like a musician or like anything else who, I wake up every morning and I know what I'm going to do workout wise that day. It is part of my DNA and part of my plan. And it's the same way as in your profession. I want to have things and resources that I'm studying, staying up to date on, that is in my niche, so that when I sit down and Mike calls me up and says, hey, I've got a client that has this situation. What do you think? I don't know. It depends. Let's ask a bunch of questions. Let's get all the information. And here's the reason why it depends and why that is so important. This isn't a one-size-fits-all industry.
Right.
And David, because we worked on a case where I went to 3 different companies and ran stuff 14 different ways before I finally was like, Eureka. I called you up and I was so excited because I spent 5 to 6 hours working numbers until I finally was like, okay, I found a solution that matches what the client has, the direction they're going, and what they want as an end result. And so what's fun, like I said, there's 2 things that I truly absolutely love. One is if somebody comes to me with a business plan, taking somebody's idea and giving it life is amazing. The second
creation process, essentially.
The other thing is taking something that is like a big black cloud for most people. Retirement. What does it look like? What are the variables, the unknowns? You talk retirement to people and they get this glazed look on their face and they don't even want to talk about it because it's like a big math problem with a lot of unknown variables that people don't understand and can't figure out. And as a mathematician, if I can get rid of the X, the Y's, the Z's, the A's, and the B's, and get to where we actually have numbers and get down to where it's like, okay, you want to retire at 62 and a half? You want to start drawing Social Security then? And this is how much cash you want? Here you go. I can give you that with quite a bit of certainty. Now let's just put the plan in place to get you there without worrying about what the market does, without worrying about the state that you're living in, without worrying about the state taxes or who's president. We don't have to worry about any of that. And when you can remove the unknowns and give somebody a plan that is understandable and attainable, that's the second thing that just gives me great joy. And if I can just concentrate on those 2 things, which I don't do a lot of the business consulting and in new business plans. I did a really nice one 2 years ago that came to fruition, and I did it remotely. And when I was finally able to matter of fact, last summer when we were in Atlanta, I was able to visit that client, and it was like old home week. I'd never officially met them, but we had spent a lot of time on the phone and on Zoom calls. So.
Yeah, but I love it when that aha moment comes on and it clicks for the client. That it's magic when that happens. Some people think we get into this business for the money, and yes, that's a part of it. But the money comes after that aha moment. When they get it, that's when you've got them, and in the best way, because they understand that we're serving them. We're trying to help them to come to a new understanding. And when that happens, the clouds part. and the sun that comes down, they understand it, and that's what I live for. I love it when that happens.
This is a hard profession. When you take a look what the average income is for people in our industry, and you add to that how many people don't make it after the first year, the second year, the fifth year. I mean, to get to this point, the margin is really, 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 really thin. And
agreed.
And I was lucky that I had the ability to not have to worry about a sale. I had other things. I had my accounting practice. I was doing other things in the financial world that allowed me to get the experience, fall on my face flat many times, have great recommendations, but didn't really know how to convey them in a way that someone would go, oh, well, that makes sense. How come nobody ever did that before? The language in this and the ability to do it in a way is extremely tricky. And when I started in my accounting practice, I always wanted to do everything that my clients would do because I wanted to be able to sit on the same side of the desk that they were. I didn't want them to feel like somebody was talking down to them or this is what I learned in college. I wanted it to feel like we were on the same side of the desk and we were partners. And I do the same thing in the financial. Everything that I advocate for, I do. I don't do anything else. I try to, like in the accounting world, I don't want to talk accounting terms and jargon. I want to talk in plain English. My wife doesn't think that I work. She thinks that I tell stories and draw pictures, and most of the time those pictures are drawn upside down. And the reason for that, if I could take a difficult financial concept and put it in an easy drawing that could fit on the back of a napkin, I've drawn on the back of receipts at restaurants. I've drawn in the sand on the beach. If I can take an easy concept and just draw it and have somebody understand it, that's way better than darkening the room and putting on the slideshow. And if this happens and if that happens and if the market does 12% and, and unicorns come out of your pool, everything will be rosy.
I had a different image that was coming to mind at that point, but that's okay. but
trying to make difficult concepts easy to understand takes a lot of time. I have an iPad Pro with a drawing program on it. I'll open that thing up and I'll just start working on concepts. I'll work on words. I'll call other members in our group and say, hey, I'm working on this concept. You talked about this. Let me run this by you and see what you think. You critique this for me and tell me what you think. Or I will take the concept and I'll open up my tax program and I'll start running numbers. And so when it's like, okay, if you do this, this is your tax liability. Do you want to pay this $15,000 a year for the rest of your life? Or how about in 7 years, you're done paying that, and now you don't have to pay that for the rest of your life. And in 20 years at $15,000 a year savings, what does that get you? I mean, this is numbers driven because everything that we talk about, we believe in because we've taken the time. We've done the math. In my case, not only have I done the math, I've done the tax returns that back it up. And sometimes I'll even go back in if I've got some information as far as what a client makes, whether they're married or single or anything like that. Sometimes I'll just go in and I'll make it unique just to them. And then, of course, when I have all the numbers, I will do it exactly for their position. Right. But the thing is, tell me another financial person that does that, because they can't. They've not done over 15,000 tax returns. They don't understand how all the tax code works. Yeah, they might have a basic understanding of, you have some deductions and, here's where this tax bracket starts. That's why, even somebody like Van, who we love and use his information a lot. He's got different Van rules of, 120 and 25 and all those. For the layperson, that is almost above their head because Okay, tax bracket, yes. Oh, AGI, yes. Is that AGI or is that after tax, before tax? What's the tax liability? I mean, there's all these terms out there. How can we just simplify it? Okay, you make this much money. Do you want to pay X number of dollars in taxes? Because that's what it is today. Do you think taxes are going to go up or go down? Oh, you think they're going to go up? Well, guess what? That 13,000 is going to go up with however much you think taxes are going to go up.
And it's not just the number, it's the meaning behind the numbers and our emotional connection to the pain and the relief of what the numbers can mean for us. And that's what someone like you, like us, we help to bring that alive to say, do you want to get rid of that tax liability? It can be done without a sacrifice in lifestyle. I want to get back because Alonzo's got a great question, but I got to ask this question first before I get into his, because at some point, you learned some things about the tax code that you were not taught in accounting school. Yeah. What was that like? What was that?
Oh, you want to know that aha moment?
Oh, bring that out. We need to hear this one, especially from the accountant.
This is actually good. So
I like this one.
I was in Blue Ash. I just signed my contract with Ohio National, who's no longer around, as far as insurance wise goes.
Essentially, yeah. Culture wise, yeah.
We had a good first day. I'm back at the hotel in Blue Ash. We're having pizza, and one of the guys there's like, "Hey, you got to meet this guy over here. He's a CPA. He's in from Indianapolis, Indiana. You guys will probably get along well." We sat down. I talked with him and his wife for an hour and a half. Great conversation. It was fun. We had a lot in common. I had just come back from a national convention for politics, and so we actually talked politics. That's what we talked about for an hour and a half. It was fun. It was not deep. It was fun. Well, the next day we get to our seminar, and it's like, okay, we would like to introduce our next speaker. He is a CPA. He was the head of this board in Indianapolis for the state of Indiana. And he had all these numbers letters after his name, like some people, RFC, CHFC, CLU,
BFD,
whatever. EIEIO. Look, I know it. Look, and it says he rarely finds clients, and I finally got a clue. I get it. Okay.
And it's like, we'd like to welcome, Brian Bloom. And I'm like, hey, I know that guy. I just spent, a bunch of time talking with him last night. And about an hour and a half into his presentation, he started talking about some things. I'm like, that does not sound right. That is not what I learned in school. I went the 7th best accounting program in the nation, #1 in California. I can't wait till the next break. We're going to corner this guy and we're just going to burn him like toast. Yeah, sometimes I get sidetracked and the toast gets a little burnt. Okay. And all of a sudden he said a couple things. I got out my notebook and I started running numbers. I even quit listening. I'm running numbers. I'm looking. And finally I get to the bottom and I'm like, he's right. I can't believe it. He is right. Everything he's talking about, the numbers play out. It goes against everything I've ever learned, talked about, gave consulting advice to clients that pay good money to know, because that's the way we were taught. That's the continuing education that reinforces it, that the government forces you to get. And I had to go up and apologize to Brian at the break, not corner him. I'm like, I can't believe this. I've never heard this presented this way like this. That night I went up to my hotel room. I was actually ready just to close up my books and get home. I mean, this was groundbreaking for me. What I did, instead of going out and mingling and doing whatever they were going to do, I sat in the hotel room and I listened to his presentation that was on the Ohio National website. I also knew this other guy named Tom Love, because he happened to be in the same agency that I just joined. I just met him. I saw he had a presentation on there. I watched that. I liked it so much, I went back and watched it again. I'm taking notes as I am going through this. And what I realized is that people only ever look at the accumulation side of this equation. The one thing that we do that nobody else does, and quite frankly, a lot of people can't do, is look at the distribution side. When you take the distribution side and you apply the tax code to it, not only does it make retirement planning easy, it makes it very predictable. And that was the aha moment, date, and time, and really started a journey for me of learning that has been life-changing.
Yeah, I met Tom Love. I won't say officially met him because it's not like I shook his hand, but it was in 2010. He came out here to Woodland Hills, California, and I had a day off from the job I had at the time. I was essentially not really in the industry, but I was still with that company, Ohio National. I had an independent contract, and they were doing these regional meetings. I thought, all right, I'm going to pretend what it's like to be an insurance agent again. It ran very much like any other insurance agent meeting. It starts off with, here's our new product. We're going to be announcing this or doing this. And I'm like, okay, yada, yada, yada. And then Tom Love took the stand, and he gave this amazing, pretty much what you saw on the Ohio National Portal was the exact same thing. Yeah. And then at the end, he was talking about the distribution of, 3 buckets of money. You have your tax deferred money, you have your after tax money, and then you have your tax free money. Now, we didn't quite get into tax exempt at the time. It's just tax free. They talk about distributing 8% distribution, which obviously is way above any safe withdrawal rate, but he's just using it as an example and showing here's the taxes on this, here's the taxes on this, here's the no taxes on this, and you get to keep all your Social Security. And it's just blowing my mind. I'm like, that's the value. How come no one could explain it to me like this before? It was just amazing. Now, this is going to bring right into Alonzo's question because, Alonzo, we can answer this one, my friend. This is my brother from another mother. He's out in New Jersey and the Brooklyn area too. He says, why do so many accountants, CPAs not believe in permanent life insurance when they're supposed to have a firm grasp of the Internal Revenue Code? What are your thoughts on that?
It's the Dave Ramsey principle: buy term and invest the difference. And most people, when they look at life insurance, they look strictly at death benefit. They don't look at all the other benefits, and especially the tax benefits for it, because it's never taught anywhere. As an accountant, you have a brief understanding as far as life insurance in total. You have a liability that you need to protect. You better make sure that you have something to cover that. If you look at, if let's say we're doing estate planning, your estate plan is the house. All of the estate assets go in that and are protected. The roof, the roofing material, what covers everything is your life insurance. You can have a basic roof on there with just tar paper and it's going to cover everything for a while. There's your term insurance. But if you really want something on there that's going to protect everything for the long haul, then you go with a tile, or you go with shingles, or you go with metal if you really want something good. I guess that might be the difference between universal, indexed, and whole life. You can have fun with that on another podcast. And so what happens is you have basic principles of life insurance, but you never get into, okay, why is it so important? And how can you use what is the most beautiful benefit of all of this? The collateral capacity of it and how the tax code relates to it. And that is outside of the scope of what accountants will look at and generally know. They're like, oh yeah, it's not taxable. Well, okay, well, why isn't it taxable? And why is it so good? And why does it spend twice as much as anything else you can do when you're looking at straight cash flow? They do not get into that because they've not run the numbers and they have never been trained in it or taught that in school. It's, oh, you need life insurance? And even think about, I remember the first life insurance agent I encountered was a Northwest Mutual client, agent. He was like the guy in that area. And he was like, oh yeah, let's just do whole life. And after you make about the 7th payment, the dividends on this are going to be enough to pay for it. And, then you'll never have to make another payment on it after 7 years. So this will be a better, he's looking at it strictly as here's what the cost is. Never Why would I want to borrow from it when I could just let it grow and use the dividends and then use it as retirement cash flow at some point in time down the road? Or as a small business owner, as a new business owner, make the payments and have the money there where, when I had a restaurant, 10 o'clock at night, hey, guess what? Your refrigeration unit just went out. You got to drop $5,000 on something new. Well, if I didn't have that cash sitting in the safe, knowing that these things happen, if you ever have a business, cash flow is king. You better have a safe. You better have a certain amount of cash to meet whatever, kind of like in your personal life. The old thing is, okay, what happens if the refrigerator goes out or the transmission goes out in your car? Those are like the two big things. You got to have. Business is the same way. What is the one thing that you would need to have cash available to replace without there being any problems? Well, guess what? If you have a whole life policy, that pretty much can handle all of your emergency needs after a few years. Those types of things are not talked about. Dave Ramsey doesn't talk about them that way, but you better have your emergency fund. Well, what if you had an emergency fund that was drawn 5 to 6% tax-free every year? Doesn't talk about that, does he? Again, he's very good at what he does, but there becomes a point in time where you have to graduate from being in debt and making a lot of money to where all of a sudden it's like, what do I do with all this money now? And again,
there's a time to graduate from tic-tac-toe to checkers, from checkers to chess.
And again, you'll only know the difference if you just don't look at, well, I heard this on the radio, or this is what somebody said. Again, that was great advice for a certain target audience. But why don't you run the numbers and see what really fits you and your need and your plan now, because you've graduated or elevated from that type of advice.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anything bad about him or what he does. He has a target market. He has a sweet spot. But there becomes a point in time where it's not a one size fits all. And at that point in time, that's where you need somebody that can sit down and really look at your numbers.
Yeah, it's interesting because talking about, the safe withdrawal rate, I actually was on tic-tac-toe this morning watching a live, and this one lady was talking about a 10% withdrawal every year. And so I'm thinking, okay, look, sure, you could take 10% every year, but 10% of what?
Mm-hmm.
So because she used the example where we retire and then the market, drops. Her wild thing was 60%. And she's like, well, I can still take 10%. Sure. I'm sure. Yeah. You could take, if you had $1 million, you could take 10% of, 400,000, but that's a lot different than taking 10% of $1 million. Right. So if you need to maintain,
and be consistent year after year. Yes.
Right. And that's just the thing. Sure. You absolutely, you can take 10% every year, but the question is 10% of what? And we all know that sequence of returns risk in the distribution phase is much different than sequence of returns risk on the accumulation phase. On the accumulation phase, it doesn't really matter. But once you start drawing the money out and you have these drops, that's where the sequence of return risk really compounds on itself, because not only are you losing that money, but now you're still having to draw against that account. So you're surrendering more. So you have to automatically make up that deficit just to get back to even. It becomes a compounding problem.
And most people don't have an income need that could be that varied. If you were taking 10% of $1 million, that's $100,000. If the million drops 60% down to 400, but they're used to taking out $100,000,
right?
They can't just take 10% of 400 and be okay. Typically they have a set amount of income that they need, and therefore that's why it declines. So you're right.
And
10% of what? And if it's 10% of the annual value, that's a problem.
Right. And generally speaking, we have inflation, right? So you're going to need more money, not less money, especially if you want to maintain the same standard of living. And again, as we all talk about, if tax rates go up, that's going to affect the amount of money you have to pull just to account for the taxes. So this
I want to go back because Brian made a great analogy, because That's something that accountants don't necessarily do. He made the story of the estate plan and the roof and such, made it understandable. What do you want that roof made out of? I'm like, who else talks like that? The accountants don't talk like that. You need life insurance. Here's the contract. Sign it. Pay the least. Your goal is to get the least amount of premium to get the need covered. That's what the typical advice would be. And so what's great is that you brought it to a different level of understanding. And that's what we like about working with Brian, because he brings that out to help us understand why we're making the decisions that we're making. What are the consequences of the decisions that we're talking about, to make sure we're making a fully informed choice, and we're okay with whatever choice you make. We just want to make sure you have all the information in behind that decision so that you can choose what makes the best sense for you. And so that's what we love about you, Brian.
Well, even something as simple as like term insurance, which term's extremely important. I love writing term for a couple of reasons. But one is, at the heart of life insurance is a death benefit. And there are times and situations where the death benefit becomes critical. And a lot of times insurance agents are just looking at, well, how much can you afford? Or, what they're looking at just selling something, as opposed to sitting down and actually determining exactly how much death benefit you need. How many people do you run into? It's like, well, I've got $100,000 of life insurance through my bank. It was either free or it's, that's probably more than enough.
Or through work, they have like their $50,000 policy or whatever that just comes.
Yeah. And here's what, you need to be able to bring to the table as an advisor. If let's say you had a husband and wife, and the let's say the wife stayed at home, it was traditional, or even now today, stay-at-home girlfriends. They have a child, one income earner at $60,000 a year, or whatever it is. Again, this is all relative based on where you are in the country. If you're where David Kinder is at in the Inland Empire in Southern California, where you can rent out somebody's garage for $5,000 a month and it has a studio apartment, you're like, okay, that's, I'm going to need more than $60,000 a year to survive. Or if you're in Naples, Florida, where I'm at, where, it's the highest concentration of billionaires in the United States, there's a lot of different places, and in numbers are all different, and those have to be reflected in this. But generally, most of the country, if let's say 60 to 70,000 is what that income would be. If you've got a young child and all of a sudden, the father dies, 100,000 is not going to cut it. And when you look at what the real cost would be to maintain that household to where you would still have a mother that can raise a child, you still have a lifestyle where they can stay in their house. And the sad thing is, when you experience a situation, a friend, a family member, where they did have a primary breadwinner die, and they have to go back and live with another family member, or they have to move to another state, literally uproots everything. And Van talks about this in really good terms. When you have a situation like that, the child didn't lose one parent. There's a strong possibility that they're losing both parents, because everything that other parent did to raise money, now they're out there doing it. Now who's raising the child? They lost both parents. And so everything we do, we just can't look through a lens of, here's just the one thing that we're going to offer or do. We have the ability to use a product and use it in a lot of various ways. And if you realize all the ways that it can be used and leveraged and get more than $1 of use for the $1 spent for that one product, I don't think there's anything else that can touch it for most consumers. But it's not brought to the realm of possibility of everything that it does, because it's usually limited by what the agent knows or what somebody that's trying to sell something is trying to do only that one thing with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's probably the most logical, beautiful, well thought out, paragraph or sentence or whatever about the proper use of life insurance and what it's designed to do. And I would say at least 99% of people have never heard it put that way.
And oh, by the way, if used properly, not only can you get that death benefit, but there are a lot of other benefits and things that we can integrate into what you're already doing and make your life that much better, and put a plan in place that makes sense, that you understand, that's not just subcontracting out a huge portion of your life to just trusting somebody that they're doing the right thing.
We can help people become winners of their financial planning, not become possible victims of it.
You got
which
it.
is one of the biggest things that I love to advocate for, to make sure people are not victims of their planning. Whether it's stock market or that they're locked out of their money, they can't use it in the event that opportunities come up or emergencies come up. When those things happen, having liquidity, use, and control is so key in those moments. Knowing that you can get money when you need it, not will the IRS let me? Or do I qualify for a hardship? Will they let me do this and hopefully avoid the 10% penalties and stuff like that?
And then that's why I think it's important to seek out, people like David Kinder and Mike Moffitt. That no, I'm serious. I'm serious in this, because we believe in a transfer of knowledge, of helping other people grow and understand, especially with what they're doing. And we've had the benefit to learn from top people and continue to want to learn. I mean, I look at, somebody like Tom Love, who has been instrumental in my growth as a professional.
Yes.
His command of the language and being able to explain things in concepts transcends the industry. And I look at somebody like Van, who is able to take concepts and put them into questions to where all of a sudden somebody's having to think about something that they heard. This isn't just, oh, that was a great statement. Well, wait a second, that was a question. How do I answer that? How does that apply to me? And as we continue to learn from people and in bringing that knowledge into our skill set and continue to learn and grow from other people. I mean, you've got a symposium coming up in a week with all kinds of great people with great ideas. I plan on being a part of that and listening and growing and seeing what I can apply to my clients and in future clients and all of that in what I do. And I think taking the best information and helping apply it and helping people learn and grow works all the way up and down the tree. And, on the bottom, you've got wide branches from people that have long gray hair. And as you go up, the hair gets fuller and darker. And our goal is to continue to let those branches grow and get bigger and learn and help people all the way up and down that stem.
And I've been so fortunate because of the Facebook group that I'm the admin for, and the programs of things I've put together, I get to be front row and center of all this stuff, which also means I get to ask anybody any question I want. And I'm always the student learning, and I'm trying to figure out what can I get from this person that I might not have heard before. So when you're mentioning the virtual summit, this is the IARFC, which is the International Association of Registered Financial Consultants. It's a financial industry association, and we're running a virtual summit for 2 days, next Thursday and Friday. It's free for financial professionals. If you haven't registered, get on there. It's free. Not to mention, I get brownie points for the most people that show up and use my name. So hopefully, Brian, you use my name when you registered.
I will do that.
Perfect. Thank you. I've got a win. I'm in a friendly contest with Jeremy Nason. So got to say, Alonso, thank you. It says Dave, Mike, and Brian. Thanks so much for doing this and the countless other streams. They've been humongous helps for people like me. Absolutely. It's part of the reason why we do this. And quite frankly, it keeps me fresh, keeps me on top of things, especially being able to do spotlight interviews like this and bringing on more. I've got other guests that I'm planning on. We're not going to be meeting next week because I'm running a summit, and we're planning about 300 people. So, which is a beautiful crowd size here. I think we're going to leave it at that. We've gone over by our usual time anyway. Not that we have a set time, but Brian, thanks for joining us. This was great. I'm looking forward to getting the feedback as other people watch and replay. If you guys want to work with Brian, sorry, you're going to have to contact us. You get to Brian through us. Brian is nowhere on social media, so you can't reach him directly. But Mike and I and Kurt, we work with Brian on a regular basis. So if you want to work with someone like him, that's who we work with, especially when we feel the need that we've got to bring in another mind and another set of eyes behind the numbers. That's one reason why we like working with Brian. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you all so much. And we'll see you probably in 2 weeks. That's when we're planning our next one. So we'll catch you then. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.